Okay, so just a reminder, you guys, that I know that this is a lot to sit in front of the smartboard and take notes, but we're at the end of the year and we need to get through this. So hang in there. I just have a little bit left, and maybe you're already done or pretty close to done. I just want to make sure that we use up the whole hour if possible, because we want to get through this, get done, and then if you look over on the whiteboard, you'll see that I don't know if I point in the right direction. I probably have to point that way from the smartboard, but if you look over on the whiteboard on our schedule, it'll show you that we're going to finish this PowerPoint with your student notes, have an open note quiz. We'll do a little reviewing after we take this open note quiz, and then the next day we're going to have a test. So it's going to go bam, bam, bam. So you need to be paying attention. You need to be absorbing this. And hopefully there's enough repetition, and hopefully it just makes sense that this won't be too challenging for you. So anyway, we were talking about logistic growth. We just finished talking about exponential growth, where it just takes off. But we know that that's not realistic. So we look at a different model that we call logistic growth. And this isn't what it means, but it always makes a better fit for me, is when I think of logistic growth, it's a little more logical. It's maybe something that would make more sense. So you might have early rapid growth. You know, you start out slow, and then you have some rapid growth, and then it starts to plane out. And then this line up at the top, what do we call that when we reach that line? What would we call that line right there? Carrying capacity. So when we see this kind of graph, and we see it reach that top, and we can draw a line straight over like that, that's our carrying capacity. So this whole thing is logistic growth. So it's a model of population growth that shows where growth slows or stops following. So you have that period of exponential growth first, and then it slows or stops. And in this case, instead of looking like a J, it kind of starts to look a little more, not exactly, but a little more like an S. So they call this the S curve. Now, when a population size is small and birth rates are high, so you got a small population, birth rates are high, death rates are low, causing the population to grow nearly exponentially. That's what we call the logistic growth. It's not quite exponentially, but you know, we're seeing a pretty steady increase, and then we reach our capacity. It's not quite the same, but we see some similarities. So as the population reaches the carrying capacity, the growth rate starts to slow, and it levels off. Oops, sorry about that. When the population is at its carrying capacity, birth rate equals death rate. Does that make sense? Because we've planed out, it's doing a straight line. If that line's going straight across, birth rate equals death rate. What's going on when that line is going up? Birth rate is greater than the death rate. And then what happens when the line is going down? You haven't seen that on a model yet, but it happens. Then the death rate is greater than the birth rate. And that can happen. I mean, if you think about what would be a good example? Let's say rabbits. Again, you've got rabbits. The population is exploding, exploding, exploding. They're growing exponentially. So all of a sudden we see it going up, 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 up. And then it reaches its carrying capacity, but a bunch of coyotes in the area are catching wind of this huge population of rabbits, and in come the coyotes, and they're just going to devastate that population of rabbits. Then you're going to see a decline, because you're going to have more deaths than births. So, I mean, there are cases that you have all of that happening. So here are some assumptions of the exponential model and the logistic model. That should say model, not mode. So one assumption made by both models is that the carrying capacity is constant and does not fluctuate. We already talked about that. It actually does fluctuate in reality, but we don't need to show that exactly. Straight line works just fine for us. Also in reality, the carrying capacity changes with the environment. So if we've got a drought obviously the carrying capacity isn't going to be nearly as high as an environment that is abundant with resources. So the environment is going to change the carrying capacity. Then also, like here's exactly what I was just talking about. Here's our example, a drought in a prairie where there would be less vegetation. So all of a sudden fewer prairie dogs would survive because they have less food. And then the carrying capacity is going to be lower than normal. And this is going to affect, we were talking about food chains and food webs. This is going to affect a lot of different organisms. Let's say you do have a drought. That is going to affect the population of plants. Because remember, plants are organisms too. So sometimes we talk about the population of plants. Not as often as we talk about the population of animals, but we do talk about the population of plants. So if we have a drought, we're going to have fewer plants. If we have fewer plants, probably going to have fewer herbivores. If we have fewer herbivores, that's going to affect our carnivores. So you have this cycle. It's going to affect all the way up the food chain. That's why we always say that life is so interconnected. So I'm going to use this as a stopping point, and we'll pick it up from here. When we talk about limits to growth.